Hello, I'm Katrina Marshall. Last week here on Foreign Exchange, the lifeblood of our economy, we discussed debt. More specifically, the difference between government debt and household debt. First, we established the definition of household debt versus government debt. Now we make the direct link to foreign exchange and our level of reserves. We've been speaking with the acting director of the Research and Economic Analysis Department of the Central Bank of Barbados, Michelle Doyle-Lowe, and senior lecturer in economics at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, Dr. Winston Moore. Now let's get back to that chat. All right, Michelle, now that we've determined what government debt is and what household debt is, how are they similar and how are they different?
Well, we've determined that both government as well as households would use debt to undertake large value purchases. Unlike households, where debt may be defined in domestic dollars, for government you can have a combination of domestic as well as foreign debt. And that's important in terms of the foreign reserves because it means when government undertakes foreign borrowing, there is an injection in terms of the level of international reserves that flow in. At the same time, this debt has to be serviced. Interest has to be paid to the creditors and eventually it will mature. And that represents an outflow of foreign exchange. The other element to it relates to the fact that Barbados has a high import propensity. So we consume a lot, but a lot of that is imported. When households undertake to borrow more, it means that your consumer imports are likely to increase. At the same time, if government is paying more to households in the form of wages, or if itself government is spending more on services and goods, that too can put pressure in terms of the level of imports and by extension the amount of international reserves that you have.
When does government need to adjust its policies to address its debt?
At any point in time where government is unable to pay interest on its debt or to service its debt by way of paying it off when it matures, then there's an issue. That is heavily tied to the amount of funds that government must set aside in terms of revenue to service this debt. What you do not want is a case where government has to utilize a lot of its revenue just to service debt rather than directing it to entities or to projects that can either employ people or earn income or contribute to the social good.
If we've gotten ourselves into debt, surely there are ways of getting ourselves out of it. So what are our options?
Well, Katrina, all debt is not bad. At the
Say
end
that
of the
again.
day, no, I'm being very serious. At the end of the day, government needs debt in order to operate. It is not possible for debt to be paid off completely, where you have all individuals and all companies that hold government securities saying, I would like back my money now, one day. It's not feasible. Right? Okay. What's important though is that government manages its debt in such a way that it ensures that interest is paid on time, that it is considered in terms of the risks related to that debt so that investors are confident enough to continue purchasing that debt. And that allows government to have access to the financing it needs at any point in time.
Where are we as a country as it relates to the two types of debt, household debt and government debt?
For Barbados, we've been able to achieve a debt to GDP ratio of 79%, and that is taking account of the holdings of debt by the NIS and is consistent with the IMF recent convention on calculating debt.
The most recent estimate of household debt in Barbados is about $4.5 billion. To give that figure some context, that would translate to about 60% of GDP. For a number of countries around the world, their household debt to GDP ratio is significantly higher. Some countries have household debt ratios to GDP of about 120% of GDP. We don't want household debt to get too large because it basically has a significant impact on our foreign exchange reserves. About 70 to 80% of every single dollar that we spend is spent on imported goods and services. So, for example, if I purchase a new car that is imported from Japan or some other East Asian country, essentially, if there's increase in debt, which means increase in consumption, you should see some fall in the foreign exchange reserves.
Well, that's it for another edition of Foreign Exchange, the lifeblood of our economy. I'm Katrina Marshall. Join us next week when we look at how you, the individual, can contribute to economic stability. Until next time, for Foreign Exchange, the lifeblood of our economy, I'm Katrina Marshall.